Could you give us a quick introduction of yourself?
Okay, sure. So I'm Ava Lee. So currently I'm actually in tech consulting with a company called Thinking Machines.
Mhm.
So it's quite specific to data, IT, AI consulting. And before that was when I was with BCG. So I was with BCG for around 2+ years. I started off as a business analyst, which was a role that existed when I applied. It anymore exists, I think, right now. And then got to associate, and that's where I left BCG. Before BCG, my background was actually in accountancy. So I studied business administration and accountancy in UP, the University of the Philippines, Diliman. So that was like a 5-year course, and I took the board exams to get the CPA title.
That's super cool. I guess for students who don't know, could you give us a brief explanation of what BCG does?
BCG, so Boston Consulting Group, is what we would call a management consultancy firm. And typically, what they do is, in broad strokes, they like to talk about this as solving big companies' biggest problems. So
Mm.
it usually deals with enterprises, really big companies, names you know anywhere in the Philippines, around the world. If you ask me what I do, I might have to give you a very vague answer again, because the reality of this industry and the job is that we work on a project basis in essence. So you work on a certain project for a few months at a time, and basically when that's done you work on a new project, and usually no two projects are really exactly the same. So I would say like the variation in the types of work that you do is a key thing that defines what the job is. It's pretty broad, right? The way I usually concretize this to people when I talk about it is to give a couple of examples from my time in BCG. What are the kinds of projects that I worked on, and what are the kinds of roles that I played?
Mm.
One of the longest, biggest projects that I was on was for a telecommunications company, and the work was heavy on implementation. And by that, I mean you are really working hand in hand with marketing managers, product managers, sales managers to do analysis and execution of their projects. So for this one specifically, it was like working with them to analyze what types of products do we want to launch into the market, what types of sales strategies do we want to execute in different places in the Philippines, etc. So that's one example. There's
Mhm.
another example of being a corporate strategy manager.
Mhm.
So that means going above sales marketing managers in the first example. And now in this example, it would be working with C-suite of a company and thinking about as a whole company, what is our high level strategy? And that means thinking in terms of for the next 3 to 5 years, what are the priorities of this company? Should we double down on and IT and AI? Should we change the way we operate as a business? Should we think about expanding into these markets, etc.? So it's at the higher company level. That's another example, classic strategy example. Then I've had roles where it really depends on what the customer is asking for. So there was one client where the work was actually very similar to what a lot of us might have done in school, which is like design a survey, run a survey,
Mm.
run some interviews, and then turn that into a paper and turn that into some slides. So there, the nature is more like a being like a research lead. And some other things that I've done here and there, you do things like financial analysis as part of due diligence, helping a certain client decide if they want to acquire another company, and also business development work, like how do we try and sell, this one's more a bit more internal, like how do we try and sell BCG services to clients. Yeah, it's quite varied, but I hope that gives like a better picture of the different possibilities and yeah, the variation that really exists in this kind of job or
Mm.
industry.
Yeah, for sure. This is a lot clearer than I remember when I was in college and I asked people what consulting was, and they were like, it's problem solving. And I was like, that tells me nothing. So thank you for your super comprehensive like overview of your work there. I'm sure a lot of students will appreciate that. Is consulting like a big thing in the Philippines? And is it a popular career path for accounting students?
So when I was a student, I don't think it was that popular. It felt like only a few people either really knew about it or would actually take the time to look into it more and prepare to apply for these companies. I think partly it might have been a little bit linked with the presence of these companies during that time, because when I was applying, only McKinsey had been here for a while, but they only take something like one student every year, one fresh grad every year, something like that. When I was applying, BCG had now established it. By then, BCG had now established their Manila office, but the intake was also not very big. It might have been something like 2 to 3 max a year. And Bain at that time was also not yet really present in the Philippines. There was no Bain Manila office. So during that time, consulting was a very niche thing. Most people in my course would still go for roles that I think would sound very common to any business student. So like roles in FMCG companies, PNG, Unity, those types of companies. Those are really what were top of mind for everyone. Consulting was more of a niche thing. But from what I hear today, and also the presence of these three today, it's much more common. I think consulting is now the new PNG and Unilever. If the few conversations I've had with some people are true, and the amount of people that I talk to as well, yeah, the younger folks now that talk to me about applying, it seems like more people have this awareness of consulting as a career path. And also, to my point on presence, Bain now has a Manila office. BCG recently had been very active also in growing their Manila office. McKinsey is the one that I'm not so sure about their general strategy on recruitment, but Bain and BCG for sure have been growing their presence.
How did you find out about it then?
The funny thing is, I was actually at a mentorship brunch breakfast with a mentor or student organization. And this was for a finance organization. And it was to think about careers in finance. Because right before consulting, that was what I was exploring. I wasn't so sure though, because my challenge then was I had just recently gotten deeper into my finance classes, really liked them, really liked the space. At the same time, there's only a certain level of creativity that's involved versus I was swinging back and forth throughout college, because right before this I wanted to do finance mindset. I want to do advertising. I wanted to be in the creative space. And that was so I was swinging back and forth. Then this finance mentor actually told me, hey, have you actually considered consulting? Have you heard about it? Have you looked into it? And I actually did not have any idea about it, about what it could bring for me. And he said, check it out first. He connected me to someone who was then in McKinsey, Manila. And it was like love at first sight, but it was more like a love at first chat. And this is why I'm also pretty like happy I feel strongly about people listening to other people about their career choices, because that's precisely the way I got into it. I had this conversation with this person from McKinsey, and the moment he had this call with me about what the job entails, I was like, this is it. This is the job for me. This is my dream job. I don't have to really choose a specific discipline. I can be in a job that lets me practice all kinds of skills and aspects. There's a creativity aspect. It's also very heavy on quantitative analysis. It's very dynamic. And yeah, and that's where I was like, I have this happen. And from that call, I started reading up a lot about the industry on like Reddit, forums. I started watching videos on YouTube. And then, yeah, I really started preparing, because I found out that the preparation is actually, it's a big task to prepare for this kind of industry.
Can I ask what were the resources that you found most helpful when you're preparing?
Definitely business schools case books. So most business schools, they would have student consulting clubs, and they would prepare these what we call case books, case interview decks with sample cases. And then I would really take those and practice a lot. There was also this set of like audio records from Victor Cheng called Look Over My Shoulder. And it's a set of recordings covering other people who were practicing and applying for consulting, how they would do their interviews, what does it sound like, and he would have commentary like, you should do this, you should do that, watch out for this, watch out for that.
Cool. I think Victor Cheng was a thing already when I was in college. Yeah, I think it was like at that time, it was like I might have signed up for his like mailing list or something like that. So wow, he's still a strong brand in the consulting prep space. That's good to know. Oh, and you mentioned you wanted to do something more creative than finance. Do you feel like you were able to use your creative side in consulting? Because I think the impression that a lot of people have is that you do a lot of research and analysis. And yeah, I think a lot of creatives, they wonder, will I be able to use that creative side?
Yeah, so I think it also depends on what kinds of creativity you had in mind. The bit that was around, how do I say this? Graphics. Not that I'm deep into that, but you do make a lot of slides and you do make things look pretty in consulting. There's that kind of aspect. The other one is around like framing, how you frame things, how you package things, the soft nuances in communication, like your choice of words, the way you present it, the way you storyline and flow, yeah, information that you want to convey. So that is a heavy skill that you do use in consulting. So I think it was also very aligned with the kind of creativity that I was thinking about. So I think those are the two things in terms of skills. But then in terms of industry, you also get a little bit of it if you're lucky. Depends on the cases that you get. But for me, for example, there was one case where it wasn't a full case, but it was a couple of pieces of work around marketing strategies for a tourism department. So how do you think about it? Yeah, and this was like coming out of COVID. So the theme was like, how do you think about jumpstarting your tourism after COVID? What kind of messaging, framing, but then also more technical and concrete things, like what kinds of implementation was thinking about digital, thinking about process policy given health concerns, etc. So in that respect, very happy with the kind of like creative exercises I got to be part of and do on the job.
That's cool. That's good to know. Yeah, and for sure you have a lot more room for creativity than like accounting would be able to.
Very, very.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Can you walk me through the application process?
Sure. I think so. Application process, I'll start it off with what's a good starting point. So I think one would be if we think about discovery, that is part of the application process, discovering more about the role, talking to people. I think the first good touch point was when one of the firms was holding an information session. So basically, I signed up to that, attended it, listened to a couple of people from that firm talk about what the job entailed, met people, and then they also shared their contact details. And starting there is when basically that started off. That might have been like one big concrete start to learning about the role. Alongside that, learning about the role and also about the application process, because they shared the process and the career ladder as well. On the side of that, also a lot of self-research. I think that's important if you're to apply to this industry. Those are the things that I mentioned around like Reddit, forums, even YouTube, to learn about the space, how things work. And then the next touch point was to fill up like the typical ones. You fill up some kind of application form, you send in your resume. I gave a cover letter as well. And after that is when they would ask you to take some form of assessment. So I've been through this with two firms. One of them was like a purely online test. The other one was like an online test, but I had to go to the office of the firm to take it. And the test is, you can think about it as like business and strategy cross like reading comprehension. So the way it typically goes, they give you some scenarios, they give you graphs, information, and then they ask you to like analyze that and answer multiple choice questions based on those. That was in my time. I think from what I've heard, it might be a little different now for some firms. There might be aspects of this assessment that involves, for example, recording yourself on video, speaking about your analysis. So it's best to just double check with the recruitment teams of these firms for what the latest is. But then after that is when you'd proceed to case interviews, which I think is the core thing about applying to consulting. And here's maybe where I'll share a bit more context around preparation. So I've heard about other people who have prepared for as long as, let's say, after graduating, they take a year to just really prepare
Wow.
for these types of interviews. Of course, it's not. I doubt it's full time. It's also them taking their time resting and all of that. But for me, it was around. I'd say the bulk of it was around over 3 months, together with doing my regular academics for school, three plus months. But at the same time, I know some people that are able to manage with even less time, maybe 2 to 3 weeks. So it really depends on you, but I would really suggest at least checking it out early to see what your baseline is. And then that's when you can plan, right? So what does checking out what your baseline really mean? I think there's no other way than to just try a mock case interview with someone and see how it feels, get a feel of how it goes, what you're having trouble with at the start, and then work at it, right? Because here is now where I'll talk a little bit about the case interview for people who aren't familiar. But in a case interview, you would basically have to do a lot of talking and thinking on the spot. What it looks like is you and the interviewer would tackle a certain business problem. The way it would work is the interviewer would start it off giving you a certain business situation. It could be something like a hypothetical company, insurance company A or insurance co has recently been, let's say, the revenue numbers and revenue has been falling. CEO doesn't know why. Can you help them figure out what the problem is and how to solve it? And it can be something as vague as that. And then it can be something a bit more specific. Revenues have been falling. They've already asked their team to look into more data. And we think the problem might be around our portfolio of products, the kinds of products that we sell. And basically, they could give you more detail and then make the question a bit more specific. But the bottom line is you would still be given quite an open-ended question, some or no data to start with. And then the interviewer will just be like, what do we do? And then on your part, what you then be able to demonstrate is how you approach this super vague thing in a structured way. So you take some time to write out how you would approach this problem in a structured way. For example, in the case of revenues, you might say revenue would be driven by the number of plans, insurance plans that we sell, and how much each plan usually costs. And then you drill down a lot of details. I think this is not the right place for me to go to further detail than that. You guys can check out how it's usually done. But the bottom line is you start off with a structured approach. Then you go back to the interviewer and it's almost like interview them and say, do we know anything about this? Can you give me data about that? And based on what they say, you engage in this back and forth, which would basically be an exchange of data and you translating that into an insight. And given that bit of information, what else do I look at? What else do I do? So it's a back and forth of the talking and analyzing live. And you want to arrive essentially at an answer to the question posed at the very start of the case. And you might say that the reason revenues are falling is because of this. Since this is a problem, this is what we should do. And yeah, that's basically you solving the case interview or doing the case interview right. We'll add, though, that usually in early rounds, at the start of or end of this kind of interview, you would still have some questions that are more like your typical interview. Can you talk me through your resume? Why are you thinking about applying to consulting? What do you think is like maybe a strength or experience that you have that you can leverage in consulting? Why this particular firm? Why not the other firm? Typical questions like that. But I think the way it goes is for early rounds of interviews, usually two. The bulk of it would be about that case interview. So after that's when you would do maybe one final case interview with the senior, usually like the head of the office. Here's where I would differentiate it a little bit, where the case interview becomes a bit less important, I'd say. It becomes more like it's just extra validation of what you've already proven in the first two. And I'd say in the last interview, what becomes more important are the more intangible aspects of your meeting, which would be a bit more around your experience, your fit, but also, how do I say? I think demonstration of more intangible and mature consulting skills. So how do you navigate like a casual conversation with a senior? Are you presentable, business job ready? Do you show high level business sense? Can you engage in a casual conversation with that kind of business acumen, even outside the more rigid case interview? And then I think fit. Can you be seen as someone that would fit in nicely with the rest of the team that the firm has? I want to avoid making it sound cliquish when I say fit, I think it's a combination of the things that I've mentioned. It's also like business acumen, how you present yourself. You seem to have the right maturity. Does your career journey or direction seem to fit? Does it seem like you are right to be doing consulting right now? So I think that's long and winding walkthrough of the application process. If I were to summarize it, there's the usual hurdles on resume. There's a test, then case interviews and interviews. So I think that's a walkthrough.
Wow, thanks for this very detailed and vivid walkthrough. Yeah. So what do you think got you past the resume and test phase?
For resume, I think I would say maybe like I'll categorize it into three. So one is definitely academics, but academics, I'd say this is more like a table stakes. It's a box to tick. It's not a differentiator necessarily. So the only thing I'll say, as long as you have decent enough grades to show that you can perform academically, you don't have to be top of the class or anything like that. As long as you tick the box, that's good enough. The second I would consider as experience, impact, and that's usually through either traditionally it could be like your school organizations, student organizations, have you roles that show and therefore had the opportunity to demonstrate impact, even if it's small scale. At least you can show those kinds of skills, leadership skills, communication skills, anything that would line up with a lot of the typical work in consulting anyway, which is like project management, delivering output. And then the last thing I would say is probably this is a bit more complex to explain, and it's not a hard requirement, but it's a very nice thing to have, which is a kind of storyline in your resume or cover letter. Does your profile you have a cohesive theme, story, direction? Hey, Ava is all about a certain, and it shows that you have that to follow through, and basically you have that sense of like direction, right? And you have something that's special. This one is something I would say then is a bit more of a differentiating aspect versus a box to tick. For me, I think one thing I'm very happy with in my profile is that, and actually the experience itself is something that made me very happy, which is joining case competitions. I actually like case competitions a lot more than actual school. So I joined a lot, and they were in different areas. So I joined an investment research competition. There was one that was like a mergers and acquisitions competition, but then there were also marketing competitions and strategy competitions. Joined one that was actually hosted by BCG, and that was part of what started the sort of relationship or touch point with them as a company that I was applying to. But basically for me, that was what I would consider something that I would consider is more of I hoped was a special thing in my profile. It actually was a discussion point that I had in my final interview with BCG, talking about how I did a lot of competitions and how a lot of the skills and situations that I got put in actually reflect consulting. So like working with a new team every time, solving problems, working under pressure, dealing with different people, different contexts, blah, blah, blah. So basically, it was part of my unique profile and story. And it's usually good, I think, for a candidate to have something like that. It could be anything. You could tailor it to what you like, what you think you have an advantage in. But I would say that's like a very nice thing to have.
So having a clear narrative for why you want to work in this field.
I think that's the way to put it, yes.
And can I ask how you answered why BCG?
Mm. If I recall correctly, I brought up my specific touch points or connections that I'd already made with the people that I had met. Truth be told, I think it's very hard to really say something mind blowing about why one of the firms is different from the others. So I think what I talked about was just something that was very true and very personal, which is that I had actually met a couple of people from BCG before I was applying and during the application that I really liked. There was a project leader that took some time off during the Christmas holidays. It was like December 26th or December 27th, I think, and took that time to do a mock case with me just to
Wow.
help me practice. There was this other person that was involved in the BCG case competition that I had joined and had taken the time to invite me to the office, take me out for dessert, like just to talk to me about BCG, make sure I got to know the firm, got to know the people. So I think that was something that I was sure inherently thankful for and happy with. And it's something that is quite, it's not wow, but it is true and very distinct that I could not have the same exact relationship and impression of the people of another firm. Not to say that other firms were not helpful, because there were also other people that were very helpful from there. But at least for BCG, I can actually say I've met BCG people and I really like them, and these are people that I like to work with. Um, yeah, I think that was one angle to it. If you were to talk about like a certain management consultancy
Mhm.
versus the other management consultancies, the other way to answer a question like that is to put BCG or put the class of management consultancies and compare them to other industries. So the other way that I framed it in this other interview was to put it beside like startups and other traditional corporates and say that BCG feels like it's somewhere in the middle. You get some kind of like startup excitement around variety of work that you could do, creating impact, but at the same time, you have a lot of internal structure that is more to the tune of traditional corporates, so where it's a company that's been around for a long time. You're not scrambling to deal with a lot of ambiguity and changes internally, things that you figured out and settled over many years. So that sweet spot in the middle of the two types of companies is something that I like about BCG. So that's the other way you could frame it. So take BCG as management consultancies versus other types of companies.
Can you share a bit about your like first few days on the job, training, onboarding, any surprises?
Mm-hmm. So first few days on the job were actually very, how do I say this? It it actually, compared to what the job will eventually feel like,
Mhm.
it was very bite-sized, maybe is a way to put it. So like I had the pleasure of having a manager, the person, a consultant who was managing me then, who would let me sit in to obviously all of the case team meetings and the meetings with other folks on this project. But at the same time, when we would come out of it, he would structure pieces of work for me to take on step by step in a bite-sized way to get a first grasp of the type of work that are I consider are basics.
Mhm.
So like fixing up certain slides, doing very specific analyses. I joined one or two meetings with him where he probed my thoughts, like given this kind of question, it's almost like the case interview again. Given this kind of question, like how would you approach it? So I think those three things actually capture the core of what you would do as an analyst or associate in consulting, maybe even until the consultant level. So that would be slides, analysis, and then meetings. Basically, it boils down to those things. But yeah, in those first few days, it was very bite sized because every task was defined before it was given to me. I think that would be the biggest difference. If I'd compare that versus what you'd be then expected to handle as an independent associate, everything before arriving at the specific task and doing those tasks, you would also be responsible for doing. That means navigating ambiguity given view on a larger scale. Given so much information and different ways things could go, how do you chart out and decide what exactly you're gonna pick up and do and how you're gonna do it? So that, I know that sounds pretty vague though, but that's like the best way I can put it for now, probably.
They just gave you like a small sampler of what you would be doing later on, I guess.
Yep. Yeah, that was the first few days. I must mention as well, I think it'll be, yeah, I definitely have to mention that a big part of what you get in management consultancies like BCG are formal training experiences. So the first 2 weeks before I even went to an actual project in the office, I joined what we call like new hires orientation, which was like a 1 week uh, set of like training sessions in Malaysia, because the way that these companies work is usually they group all the different offices in the world system, and Philippines is part of the Asia or Southeast Asia study system. And so basically all the new hires during that time from the different offices, Bangkok office, Manila office, Singapore office, we all headed to one place to do a couple of days of training. There would be speakers who would talk about certain skills, industries. There'd be activities, exercises for you to practice and get a first look at best practices. How do we actually make slides at BCG? There was even a little course on accounting or
Cool.
financial analysis. Yeah. And that theme basically repeats across all career levels. Even at each career level, you will have some form of formal training that is usually like a week, maybe for a few days. And they would usually do this at the system level. So you would get a chance to go somewhere usually. I don't think they've ever had something in the Philippines itself. So you would, as a Filipino consultant, you would go to some other office in Southeast Asia and join consultants from the other offices to do these kinds of training exercises.
So after you start working on actual projects, is it like I know in a lot of countries, like consultants, they have to do a lot of traveling. Is that the case in the Philippines as well?
I would say by default, it is not as much, I think, as like in other markets. But that opportunity is there, or that experience might have to be something you'd be okay with. It really depends. So the way it would go is, I think by principle, there is some advantage to staffing consultants locally. So especially, for example, in the Philippines or maybe in a market like Thailand where there's a language barrier as well. So there is some advantage to prioritizing local consultant local cases. That being said, there are cases where you would have to travel, take on cases with clients from abroad. And there are different ways it could go, right? It could be you're pulled there. It could be the case need people, and it so happens you're one of the people that are available, that are being pulled to join the case. It could be more nuanced. Let's say it's a topic that you have worked on quite a lot. And so for this new project in another country, they would like to have an associate that has had already in the topic. Or it could be a team aspect, like a certain partner would like you to join for whatever reason, development reasons, anything like that. It could also be a push instead of a pull. So if you would want that kind of experience, you would want to take on a case that is with an international client. So there are also ways for you to push for that to happen. There are usually certain programs. It's almost like an exchange program in essence. You could push to apply for something like this. In BCG, there was something called, I think, Associate Abroad. This is less about a specific case and more about for a certain period of time, you would really be based in another market, or it could be case by case basis where you try to look for opportunities. Hey, a slot is opening up, a project is coming up. Can I put my hand up to be part of that project because I would like that experience to travel? So it really depends. It could be a push or a pull. Yeah, so I think there are ways to shape that experience for yourself depending on what you would like.
Interesting. So if you want to stay in the same place the whole time, that's an option. And if you want to travel, that's an option too.
I will say though that of course to some extent there might be times where you have no other option, but for by and large I think there's a way to skew the chances of you having a certain type of case.
So during your projects and stuff, how were like junior consultants supported or mentored by senior consultants?
Actually, there's a very strong I would say there's a very strong sense of like mentorship and development in companies like BCG that is driven, I'd say, two ways, right? So there's one that is driven by this is the culture that we have in terms of standard of like output and performance, and it's just constantly reinforced. Like whenever you put something up, everyone is gonna have the same. If you ask different people to comment about it, right, or pass it through partners, leaders, everyone is gonna have the same, more or less the same direction or level of this is not up to standard. Let me give you some feedback. There's so much feedback all the time. Feedback on it has to, this is the way it should go, this is the way we usually do it.
That's
That
awesome.
one is reinforced and a bit more like standard. Then there's the other stream, I think, which is less, it really depends. It's a more personal aspect. Depends on the seniors or mentors that you have the chance of meeting and working with. But I think I've been very lucky that the kind of mentors and leaders that I've been with during my time in BCG are people that believe in BCG being a place where you make relationships for life. So the way they talk to you about mentorship is not just about the actual output you do in BCG, but they're super open about talking about career, how does BCG fit in your life? How does work fit in your life?
Mm,
And so even until today and through my whole process of joining a different company, even some problems that I've had in my new company, like the mentors that I've had from BCG are people that I really consider as like lifelong friends and mentors. Yeah, I think it's really something, honestly, it's not something it wasn't one of the top things I had in mind when I was a student.
mhm.
But looking back, it is one of the biggest things I think that biggest positive about the experience that I would consider students look into. Meet as many people as you can before you join. Try to get a sense of do you like the values and the type of people that you think you'd be working with. That being said, I know it's impossible to really know for sure completely before you join. But obviously if some information in this case would always be helpful.